Hi everyone, this is Blake Anderson and I'm a videographer here in Toronto, Ontario. And in this video I want to walk you through my workflow in terms of this model shoot that I did recently at Sugar Beach on Toronto's lakefront. We did a model shoot with about 4 models, and I want to walk through the different gear I used, some of the concept behind the video and the way I thought about it in terms of shooting it, and then also talk about post-production in terms of how I color graded the footage and also edit it in my workflow. To start off, I used my Sony A7IV with the Tamron 35 to 150, and I shot it in 4K using S-Log 2, which people who know the camera understand you can use picture profile 8 to capture the most high dynamic range of the Sony A7IV. And typically what you need to do when you shoot in S-Log 2 is you need to overexpose the image, so that's ensuring that it's 1.7 to 2 stops are exposed. This way you're getting the highest dynamic range of the camera and you're not crushing the shadows, and you're also not overly exposing or clipping the highlights. Be careful when you're shooting outside. I was shooting during golden hour, capturing the models around 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock Eastern time. We had a nice sunlight that was coming from the cityscape behind us. It was dim, but we also had lights on set as well. And what I did use is my Sony A7IV, my Tamron 35 to 150. And I shot without an ND filter, as I needed to get as much light as I could. When you shoot in 60 frames per second, it's typically cutting down the light, from my understanding, is 2.5 times more light you need to get the exposure from a 24 frame exposure. When shooting 60 frames, you're not getting as much light into the lens. That's why I opened up the lens to about 2.8, sometimes a little bit less in terms of the aperture. I wanted to get the most light in, shooting at 60 frames. If it wasn't working with the 2.8, I would up the ISO to 1600, and I think at some points 3200 as when it's getting darker out. But for the most part, I was shooting with the aperture open. And with the Tamron 35 to 150, with this shoot, as when you're shooting at 60 frames on the Sony A7IV, it's going to crop into the image. So when you're shooting at 150 millimeters on the camera, you're essentially shooting at 225 in the Super 35 mode. In order to shoot, you're very much zoomed into the subject, in this case the model. That way it allows the background to be really have a lot of bokeh and create the subject, allow the subject to really pop and accentuate the model from the background. With this shoot, we did it on a beach in Sugar Beach in Toronto. I think it really captured it well in terms of the glistening from the water behind the models. There were like a factory, and that was about, I would say, about 50 yards away. Some of the lights from the factory you could see in the bokeh, as well as, again, the glistening water really helped, I think, accentuate the scene and give that kind of dreamy vibe to the video. I shot in Sony S-Log 2, which is picture profile 8, and that shoots it in a flat image, and it allowed me to not clip the highlights but also not crush the shadows. And then in post-production, once I've captured this video, what I typically do is I will cut the image down to what I consider some of the best shots. And that's typically just because I wanted to stabilize some of the footage. I cut some of the best parts and cut it down to about 4 or 5 minutes of the video. I knew that I was going to cut it even further from there. What I wanted to do in this situation is put it in a timeline, allowed Final Cut to slow down the timeline to 24 frames per second with the 60 frames that the video was shot in. And then once I had it in a 24 frame timeline, I graded the footage and edited some of the points out that I didn't like and just captured what I considered the best parts. And then I color graded it and exported it in Final Cut using H.264. And then once I had about 3 to 4 minutes of my edited best shots, I then further cut those down because I know for Instagram, typically people's attention span are probably 30 to 60 seconds at most. And so I wanted to ensure that it was at least less than 60 seconds. The way I shoot, I tend to like to go longer sometimes because I shoot often for YouTube and other content. I've been pushing myself to edit in a shorter amount of time. And I chose the song Wicked Games, and I thought it was just a great song that was very much a classic and helped accentuate the image and the theme I was going after and the emotion. I wanted to play with a certain degree of lust and temptation. I did a bit of research around the song, and it's interesting. It came out in 1989, but didn't get much traction until the movie by David Lynch. And that movie, there's a scene where they play the song, and then from my understanding, it took off from a DJ and it got even more popular. This is a song that I've always resonated with, and so it was fitting for this shoot. I chose that song, and then I chose what I considered the best part of the song. I edited to the beat, so typically that's what a lot of creators will do, editing to the beat rhythm, and that really helps to create immersion for the viewer. Some advice in terms of being a creative: sometimes we consider the audience and the impact or message for the audience, and of course you want to consider the audience, but when you're doing a creative piece and it's more about self-expression, and so I wanted to focus on what I wanted to express in some capacity. I think at some level I'm thinking about the audience, but Rick Rubin, who created a great book, talks about how the notion of the audience comes last in a lot of ways. I think some of my best work in terms of videography is when I'm not overly concerned about the audience. But of course, there's always some degree of a through line or a certain story or message we want to get across, and we have to consider the audience, but we also should consider what's driving us in terms of our inception of the video. And yeah, so that's what I did. I edited the video to the beat. I then used Magic Bullet Mojo and Magic Bullet Looks, which I go on in other videos to explain that workflow. And I also added Renoiser to make sure the image was sharp and the compression in Instagram wasn't going to compress it too much. So that's my workflow in terms of this shoot I did with the song Wicked Games and with this model shoot that I did. So hopefully this video was helpful for you to consider some tips and ideas for your next shoot. Thanks and have a great day.